to continue with the types of junctions, the most common is going to be what's known as a cellular adhesion membrane, otherwise known as these CAMs, and you see that at the bottom right. That's a CAM adhesion, and that those are types of proteins that create the connection between the lateral surface of these cells. Those connections are made up of glycoproteins and allow for an adhesion without not the kind of specialization that we're talking about with each of the other types of adhesions. The other types of adhesions have a little bit more specialization. These cellular adhesion molecules are how these epithelia attach to each other, and then what you'll have are types of junctions interspersed amongst these types of adhesions. We are talking about the tight junction. Tight junction is going to be in areas where you want to definitely make an outside and inside of where the epithelial tissue is. Think of the GI tract. Think of the stomach itself, where you have a definite outside and inside. Tight junctions don't allow even water to flow through, to diffuse or permeate. And then you have down on the bottom left, so we've talked about everything more or less, but the bottom left, you have what's known as a hemidesmosome. And a desmosome is an area where you have a connection that allows the cell to have some flexibility, some stretch, so the epithelial tissue is found in places like the bladder of the urinary tract. And in the bladder, you have to have this highly toxic material, which is otherwise known as your pee, being stored, but also stored, and that bladder is able to expand in size because these cells have the ability to stretch, particularly transitional epithelial cells have the ability to stretch. And these desmosomes, whether they're desmosomes or hemidesmosomes, depending on where you find them, the hemidesmosomes you tend to find in the basement membrane between the clear and dense layer. Clear layer is made up of proteins that are bound pretty, they're fine proteins that are bound pretty close together, and then the dense layer are more coarse proteins. And what you want to, what the basement membrane does is makes that cell impermeable to those things that it's attached to. So that cell is going to be attached to deeper tissue, and you want to make sure proteins that are found in the deeper tissue and function in the deeper tissue and are supposed to be found in the deeper tissue don't make their way into the epithelial cell. And also it creates that attachment between the epithelial cell and the tissue that is underneath it. And then you have, as I said, you have these cell adhesions, the CAM molecules that are interspersed among the basolateral area that create the cellularity that we talked about. So different types of junctions, and again, this might be material that you want to go into your textbook and read in a little bit more detail to get the picture of each one has its own special purpose in the bigger picture of how epithelial cells are able to do their function depending on where you find them in the body. All right, the next thing we want to talk about are how epithelial cells are classified. And they're classified a couple of basic ways, by their shape and also by their the number of layers they have. And so you have you have simple squamous epithelium. Well, actually you have squamous or squamous. A lot of A&P words are pronounced accurately several ways because you do have people who have accents or non-accents. Squamous is equally as correct. And you do find me saying it multiple ways, I believe, just is my thing. But what that means is flattened. And you can see that comparatively compared to the cuboidal or columnar, it is flattened. So simple means one layer, squamous means the shape, and then cuboidal, it looks like a cube, columnar, long and thin. And each one is found in certain parts of the body. Then you have them classified based on whether it's a single layer or whether it's multiple layers. Anytime you see a single layer, what you're thinking is there must be an absorption or secretion activity going on here, because that's what happens with the body. A body puts a single layer there if it wants to secrete or absorb something. And then here is your picture showing the stratified or the multiple layers. So again, you have the flattened cells. So squamous cells in multiple layers, we call that stratified squamous epithelium. You have the multiple layers cuboidal, stratified cuboidal epithelium, and same thing with columnar. Function and location will dictate what kind of or what kind of whether it's simple or stratified, and you also have a unique adaptation, I guess I might say. So the mesothelium lines body cavities, and then endothelium lines the heart and blood vessels. So you have a special adaptation for those particular areas of these types of epithelial tissue. Then talking about each of them individually, and this becomes a little bit more approachable information, I guess, with stratified squamous. Surface of the skin, we think of the skin as stratified squamous. It also it's keratinized in the skin. So when you think of the skin as opposed to the lining of the mouth, throat, esophagus, rectum, the anus or vagina, what happens is some stratified squamous epithelium is going to have specialized compound in it, which is this keratin, that makes it have a different nature than where you find in other areas like the esophagus or the throat. And what this does is provides a physical protection, provides a barrier. And so you can think of the thing that all of those have in common is they do have an opening to the outside world. So you have tissue there that is protecting the underlying areas, particularly where you can have vascularization. And this is one of the reasons why epithelial tissue doesn't have any vascularization, is there's a lot of stuff out there in the outside world you don't want to get in, and in your body, like pathogens, like anything that's abrasive to the body, or anything that chemically could be harmful to the body, meaning change the body's pH or change the body's chemistry makeup at all. Simple cuboidal, find this in the kidney. Ducts are simple cuboidal. Glandular, particularly the endocrine glandular, like the thyroid gland. And this, we think of simple cuboidal as protection, yes, because there is protection in all epithelial cells, but it's very limited, but mostly secretion and absorption. And particularly when you think of the kidney, the function of the kidney is to create liquid waste we call urine, and then transport, I guess you might say, that urine to the bladder where it can be stored. Stratified cuboidal you find in some ducts, but generally not common, because stratified isn't going to have that secretion capacity except for in the superficial layer. The layer that it has an opening to the outside of the lumen. But you do have an image here of a sweat gland, and so you do have this capacity for, excuse me, I'm going to cough. You do have this capacity for there to be secretion and absorption in stratified cuboidal epithelium. Transitional epithelium, I talked about this a little bit already in terms of the urinary bladder. A little bit with the renal pelvis and the ureters, because what happens is it allows for this expansion and then coming back into the same shape, and that happens in the bladder all the time. Comparing the bladder to the stomach, if you eat a big meal, your stomach, your abdominal area on the outside, you visibly can see that it changes shape. But as your urinary bladder expands, you don't see a change in shape in that area, and that's because of these unique types of this unique type of tissue, this transitional epithelium, that allows for this stretch, and so you have more space within the bladder without the outside of the bladder actually changing shape. The actual appearance of the cell tends to flatten out as it stretches. That's transitional epithelium. Simple columnar epithelium, you find this in the stomach, intestines, bladder, some parts of the urinary system, a certain aspect of the nephron, which is the functional unit of the kidney, and again, protection and secretion and absorption. After the first part of this particular chapter, just recognizing where this tissue is found and how that special adaptation of that aspect of epithelial tissue helps that body part function. And all of these are going to be body parts in organ systems that have an overarching job for the body, for the organism, the human. Pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, that's a mouthful. Pseudostratified means that it appears to be layers, but really isn't. And what you have are this embedding of cells that can secrete mucus. So you have a secretion of mucus in these, and you also have the presence of this cilia. Think of the respiratory system, reproductive tract, we kind of mentioned that already, and these cilia are coordinated to move in a synchronized direction, so coordinated to move in the same direction. And that coordination, by the way, is because you have gap junctions. You have gap junctions between these cells that allow ions to pass from cell to cell, and those ions dictate the movement of the cilia. Protection, secretion, to move mucus along and try to eliminate or get out larger bits of pathogens from the body. Stratified columnar, these are areas where you have of specialized areas where you need additional protection. Think of think of the pharynx, think of the salivary ducts, where you need to make sure that, and they are areas where a good amount of pathogens are introduced to that particular area. In your throat area, there is the capacity for a good amount of pathogens to be introduced to that area, so you have additional protection there. And then going on to the